Jonathan Hartwell was not your typical billionaire. Sure, he owned a sprawling estate, drove luxury cars, and had more money than most people could dream of. But deep down, he wasn't happy. His company, Hartwell Technologies, was one of the biggest names in the tech industry, known for its cutting-edge innovations and skyrocketing stock prices. Yet Jonathan couldn't shake off a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He felt disconnected from his employees, like there was an invisible wall separating him from the people who kept his empire running. Every day, Jonathan would sit in his corner office on the 50th floor, surrounded by glass walls that offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. But instead of admiring the view, he often found himself staring out at the bustling streets below, wondering what life was really like for the thousands of employees working under him. Were they happy? Did they feel valued? Or were they just punching a clock, waiting for the day to end? These questions haunted him. Jonathan's unease grew when he started hearing whispers, rumors about managers abusing their power, employees slacking off, and even talk of unethical practices creeping into the workplace. At first, he dismissed them as idle gossip. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't truly know what went on behind closed doors. The higher-ups only ever showed him polished reports and glowing presentations, painting a picture-perfect image of the company. But what if that image was just smoke and mirrors? Determined to get answers, Jonathan came up with a plan so bold that it surprised even himself. What if he could step out of his role as CEO and see the company through the eyes of an ordinary employee? Not just any employee, though. He wanted to become someone completely invisible, someone no one would think twice about. That's when the idea hit him. He would disguise himself as a janitor. The thought excited him. As a janitor, he wouldn't be expected to speak during meetings or make decisions in boardrooms. Instead, he'd blend into the background, unnoticed and unremarked upon. People would let their guard down around him, revealing their true colors, without realizing they were being observed. It was risky, yes, but Jonathan knew this was the only way to uncover the truth. To pull off his plan, Jonathan turned to Emily Carter, his longtime friend and trusted advisor. Emily had been by his side since the early days of Hartwell Technologies, and she was one of the few people who understood how much the company meant to him. When Jonathan explained his idea, Emily raised an eyebrow. "You want to do what?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "I'm serious," Jonathan replied, leaning forward in his chair. "I need to see what's really going on. If I stay up here in my ivory tower, I'll never know." Emily hesitated. "It's dangerous, Jonathan. What if someone finds out? Your reputation, your whole career could be at risk." "I've thought about that," he said firmly, "but I don't care about the risks. This company is my legacy, and I won't let it fall apart because I was too afraid to face reality." Seeing the determination in his eyes, Emily finally agreed to help. Over the next few days, they worked together to transform Jonathan into Jack, a middle-aged janitor with a plain face and simple demeanor. They bought second-hand clothes, baggy overalls, scuffed boots, and a faded cap, and practiced giving him a slightly stooped posture. Emily even taught him how to clean floors and empty trash bins convincingly, laughing as Jonathan struggled to figure out how to use a mop. When everything was ready, Jonathan took a deep breath and stepped into his new identity. On his first day as Jack, he arrived at the office before dawn just like any other janitor. The building was eerily quiet, the hum of computers and fluorescent lights replacing the usual buzz of conversation. Walking through the empty hallways, Jonathan felt a strange mix of excitement and nerves. This was it, the moment of truth. As he began his tasks, starting with sweeping the lobby and wiping down desks, Jonathan quickly realized how different this world was from the one he was used to. No one greeted him with handshakes or polite smiles. Instead, people barely glanced in his direction, treating him as if he were part of the furniture. At first, it stung a little. After all, he was used to commanding attention wherever he went. But soon, he saw the advantage in being overlooked. Employees spoke freely around him, discussing everything from weekend plans to frustrations with their bosses. Some vented about unfair workloads while others complained about colleagues hogging credit for team projects. Despite the negativity, there were also moments of kindness. A young woman stopped to thank him for cleaning her desk, saying, "It's nice to come in and find things tidy." Another employee held the door open for him when his hands were full of cleaning supplies. These small gestures reminded Jonathan that not everyone had forgotten the value of respect and gratitude. By the end of his first shift, Jonathan's back ached, and his hands were sore from scrubbing stains he hadn't noticed before. But as he changed out of his janitor uniform and returned to his penthouse apartment, he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen and heard. For the first time in years, he felt connected to his company, not as its leader, but as part of the workforce. Little did he know this was only the beginning of a journey that would change everything he thought he knew about Hartwell Technologies and himself. Life as a janitor was harder than Jonathan had imagined. The days were long, the work repetitive, and the pay, if he were actually earning it, would have been laughable compared to his billionaire salary. But none of that mattered to him. Every morning, he put on his worn-out overalls, tucked his designer watch into a drawer, and stepped into the shoes of Jack, the unassuming janitor. His goal was simple: to observe, listen, and learn. And boy, did he learn. The mornings were the quietest part of the day. As Jonathan mopped the floors and wiped down tables in the break room, he often found himself alone with his thoughts. He'd glance at the rows of desks stretching across the open-plan office, each one belonging to someone with their own dreams, struggles, and stories. From his corner office on the 50th floor, the employees had always seemed like numbers on a spreadsheet, a collective workforce driving the company forward. But now, sweeping crumbs off the cafeteria floor or replacing empty soap dispensers in the restroom, he began to see them as individuals. By mid-morning, the office came alive. Employees trickled in, some yawning and clutching coffee cups, others chatting animatedly about last night's game or the latest viral video. At first, Jonathan felt invisible, just another faceless figure moving through the background. Most people didn't even acknowledge him, brushing past without so much as a nod. But then something surprising happened. A few individuals started noticing him, not because they recognized him as their CEO, but because they simply chose to be kind. One such person was Sarah, a young marketing associate who worked on the 4th floor. She always greeted him with a warm smile and a cheerful good morning. One day she even stopped to help him carry a heavy trash bag to the disposal area. "You've got quite the workout today, huh?" she joked, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she laughed. Jonathan chuckled along, grateful for her friendliness. It wasn't much, but moments like these reminded him that kindness still existed in the world, and in his company. Not everyone was as pleasant, though. Some employees barely glanced at him, treating him as if he were part of the furniture. Others openly dismissed him, talking over him as if he weren't there. Once, while cleaning near the conference room, Jonathan overheard 2 men discussing an upcoming presentation. When one of them accidentally spilled coffee on the floor, they called out, "Hey janitor, clean this up." Without even looking in his direction, Jonathan bit back his frustration and silently cleaned the mess, reminding himself that staying in character was crucial to his mission. But it wasn't just indifference he encountered. There were darker sides to the workplace culture too. Late, one afternoon, while emptying trash bins in the finance department, Jonathan stumbled upon a heated argument between 2 senior managers. They were standing in the hallway, their voices low but tense. Jonathan slowed down, pretending to adjust his mop bucket as he listened. "I'm telling you, we can't keep fudging the numbers," one of them hissed. "If anyone finds out, relax," the other interrupted. "No one's going to find out. Besides, it's not like we're stealing from the company. We're just making sure the quarterly report looks good enough to keep the board happy." Jonathan froze, his stomach sinking. Fudging numbers. Manipulating reports. This was exactly the kind of unethical behavior he'd feared might be happening. He forced himself to move on before they noticed him lingering. But the conversation replayed in his mind all evening. How many other corners were being cut behind closed doors? Still, not everything he observed was negative. Amidst the chaos and occasional dishonesty, Jonathan discovered pockets of hope. One afternoon, while organizing supplies in a storage closet, he overheard laughter coming from a nearby cubicle. Curious, he peeked around the corner and saw a group of employees huddled together, working on what looked like a project. Among them was Maria, a bright-eyed intern he vaguely remembered meeting during a campus recruitment event. Maria was leading the discussion, her voice confident yet approachable. "Okay, so if we streamline this process, we'll save at least 3 hours per week," she said, pointing to a flowchart on her laptop screen. Her colleagues nodded enthusiastically, scribbling notes and offering suggestions. What struck Jonathan most was how genuinely invested everyone seemed. There was no ego, no competition, just a shared desire to improve. Later that week, Jonathan learned more about Maria. While cleaning her desk one evening, he noticed a stack of neatly organized folders labeled Team Mentorship Program. Intrigued, he flipped through them, carefully of course, and discovered detailed notes from weekly mentoring sessions she'd been hosting after hours. Maria had taken it upon herself to help struggling employees develop new skills. Whether it was mastering Excel formulas or improving public speaking, her efforts had already begun paying off. Several teams reported increased productivity and morale thanks to her guidance. Maria's dedication left a lasting impression on Jonathan. Here was someone who wasn't motivated by promotions or bonuses, but by a genuine passion for helping others succeed. She reminded him of why he'd started Hartwell Technologies in the first place, to create opportunities and make a difference. Watching her work tirelessly, often staying late into the night, made him realize that the company still had people who cared deeply about its mission, even if the higher-ups had forgotten it. As the days turned into weeks, Jonathan grew more comfortable in his role as Jack. He learned which employees preferred tea over coffee, who always left their lunchbox in the communal fridge, and which teams stayed late to meet deadlines. He also picked up on subtle dynamics, the cliques that formed in certain departments, the quiet resentment simmer. As Jonathan continued his undercover journey as Jack the janitor, he began to piece together a clearer picture of the company's inner workings. Each day brought new revelations, some heartwarming and others deeply troubling. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened on a seemingly ordinary Thursday evening. It was nearing 7 p.m., and most employees had already left for the day. The office was quiet, save for the hum of computers left on standby and the occasional clatter of cleaning supplies. Jonathan was tidying up the break room when he overheard raised voices coming from the nearby conference room. Curious, he paused, pretending to organize chairs while straining to catch snippets of the conversation. Inside the conference room were two mid-level executives, both well-known figures within Hartwell Technologies. One was Greg, the head of operations, and the other was Lisa, the finance director. They were seated at the table, their faces tense as they argued in hushed but heated tones. "I told you we can't keep doing this," Lisa said sharply, her voice trembling with frustration. "If the auditors dig deeper, we're done for." Greg leaned back in his chair, his expression smug. "Relax, Lisa. It's not like we're breaking any laws, just bending the rules a little. Besides, do you really want to miss out on those bonuses? The board loves seeing steady growth every quarter." Jonathan's heart sank as he realized what they were talking about, manipulating financial reports to inflate profits. This wasn't just unethical, it was potentially illegal. His mind raced as he tried to process the gravity of the situation. These weren't low-level employees cutting corners. These were senior leaders entrusted with guiding the company toward success. And yet, here they were, conspiring to deceive shareholders, employees, and even him. Forcing himself to stay calm, Jonathan quietly slipped away before they noticed him eavesdropping. He returned to his cleaning duties, but his mind was elsewhere. How widespread was this behavior? Was it limited to Greg and Lisa, or were there others involved? Worse still, how long had it been going on without his knowledge? The thought that his company, the business he'd built from scratch, could be complicit in such dishonesty made him sick to his stomach. But just as despair began to creep in, Jonathan stumbled upon something that gave him hope. Later that night, while organizing files in an unused storage closet, he found a stack of handwritten notes tucked inside a dusty folder. At first glance, they seemed unremarkable, scraps of paper filled with scribbles, diagrams, and bullet points. But as he flipped through them, He realized they were meeting notes from weekly sessions led by none other than Maria, the intern he'd observed earlier. The notes detailed Maria's efforts to mentor struggling employees. She'd identified areas where teams were falling behind, whether it was inefficient workflows, lack of communication, or outdated tools, and worked tirelessly to address them. For example, one note outlined a plan to teach a group of junior developers how to use automation software, which had reduced manual tasks by nearly 40%. Another highlighted strategies for improving collaboration between departments, leading to faster project turnaround times. What struck Jonathan most was the passion behind Maria's words. Her notes weren't dry or mechanical. They brimmed with enthusiasm and care. She wrote things like, "Celebrate small wins, it boosts morale," and "Encourage team members to share ideas, no matter how out there they seem." It was clear that she wasn't just trying to improve performance. She was building a culture of trust and support. As Jonathan read through the notes, he felt a lump form in his throat. Here was someone who understood the true essence of leadership, not authority or power, but service. Maria wasn't motivated by titles or recognition. She simply wanted to help others succeed. In doing so, she had sparked positive changes that rippled throughout the organization, often without anyone noticing. Determined to learn more, Jonathan decided to observe Maria more closely. Over the next few days, he made it a point to clean near her cubicle whenever possible. He watched as she patiently guided co-workers through complex tasks, offering encouragement rather than criticism. He saw her stay late to proofread reports for colleagues who were overwhelmed with deadlines. And he noticed how people gravitated toward her, not because she held a position of power, but because she radiated kindness and competence. One evening, as Jonathan emptied trash bins near Maria's desk, she looked up and smiled. "Hey, Jack," she said warmly. "Thanks for keeping things tidy around here. I don't know what we'd do without you." Her words caught him off guard. After weeks of being treated as invisible, hearing genuine gratitude from someone like Maria meant more than she could possibly imagine. "Just doing my job," he replied, returning her smile. "You're pretty dedicated yourself. I see you staying late a lot." Maria shrugged modestly. "Someone's got to keep the wheels turning, right? Plus, it feels good to help out where I can." Her humility only deepened Jonathan's admiration for her. In a company plagued by egos and selfishness, Maria stood out as a beacon of integrity and compassion. She reminded him of why he'd started Hartwell Technologies, to create opportunities, foster innovation, and make a difference in people's lives. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of that purpose. But now, thanks to Maria, he was beginning to rediscover it. By the end of the week, Jonathan's perspective had shifted dramatically. The discovery of Greg and Lisa's unethical practices had shaken him, but Maria's actions had given him hope. He realized that the problems within the company weren't insurmountable. They were symptoms of a larger issue, a lack of alignment between the company's values and its day-to-day operations. Employees like Maria embodied the principles Hartwell Technologies claimed to stand for, but too often, those principles were overshadowed by greed and complacency. As he prepared to wrap up his final days as Jack, Jonathan knew what he had to do. The company needed a reset, a chance to rebuild its foundation on honesty, transparency, and mutual respect. And he intended to lead the charge. But first, he needed allies, people who shared his vision and understood the importance of fostering a healthy workplace culture. Maria, he decided, would be his first recruit. Little did Jonathan know, the decisions he was about to make would not only transform Hartwell Technologies, but also redefine his own role as a leader. The lessons he'd learned as a janitor would shape the future of the company, and perhaps even inspire others to follow in his footsteps. The 2 weeks Jonathan had planned to spend undercover as Jack were coming to an end, but he wasn't ready to step back into his role as CEO just yet. He needed a plan, a way to address the issues he'd uncovered while ensuring that the positive influences within the company, like Maria, were recognized and empowered. The weight of what he'd learned pressed heavily on him. On one hand, there were people like Greg and Lisa, whose unethical behavior threatened the very foundation of Hartwell Technologies. On the other hand, there were individuals like Maria, whose quiet dedication and integrity reminded him why he'd started the company in the first place. Jonathan decided it was time to reveal his true identity, but not to everyone, at least not yet. First, he needed to confide in someone he trusted completely. That person was Emily Carter, his longtime friend and advisor. Late one evening, after finishing his janitorial duties, Jonathan returned to his penthouse apartment and called Emily over. When she arrived, he greeted her with a nervous smile and gestured for her to sit down. "Emily," he began, his voice serious, "I need to tell you something, but before I do, promise me you won't freak out." Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You're scaring me, Jonathan. What's going on?" He took a deep breath and explained everything: the disguise, the observations, the unethical practices he'd uncovered, and the inspiring work of Maria. To his relief, Emily didn't laugh or dismiss his actions as reckless. Instead, she listened intently, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. "This is huge," she said finally, leaning forward. "If word gets out about what you've done, or worse, if those executives find out, they'll try to cover their tracks. You have to be careful." "I know," Jonathan replied, "but I can't let this slide. I built this company to create opportunities, not to enable corruption. If we don't act now, it'll only get worse." Together, they devised a strategy. The next morning, Jonathan would call an emergency meeting with his top executives. He'd confront them with what he'd discovered, using evidence gathered during his time as Jack. At the same time, he would announce sweeping changes designed to root out unethical behavior and reward integrity. And Maria? She would play a key role in reshaping the company culture. The following day, tension filled the air as Jonathan walked into the boardroom. Gone were the baggy overalls and faded cap. Instead, he wore a sharp suit that screamed authority. His presence commanded attention, and the room fell silent as he took his seat at the head of the table. For a moment, he simply looked around, studying the faces of the men and women who ran his company. Some avoided his gaze, while others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "Thank you all for coming," Jonathan began, his tone calm but firm. "Over the past few weeks, I've come to realize that our company is facing challenges far greater than I anticipated. Challenges that go beyond missed deadlines or declining profits. These are issues of ethics, transparency, and leadership." Paused, letting his words sink in. Then, without hesitation, he dropped the bombshell. "I've been conducting an investigation, undercover, to understand the realities of life within." The weeks following Jonathan's dramatic reveal were a whirlwind of change at Hartwell Technologies. The fallout from his undercover investigation sent shockwaves through the company, forcing everyone, from top executives to entry-level employees, to reevaluate their roles and responsibilities. For some, it was a wake-up call. For others, it was an opportunity to rise to the occasion. And for Jonathan himself, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by humility, transparency, and a renewed commitment to the values that had once made Hartwell Technologies great. A new leadership style. One of the first things Jonathan did after exposing Greg and Lisa's unethical practices was overhaul the leadership team. He didn't stop at firing those directly involved in manipulating financial reports. He also removed several other senior managers who had fostered toxic environments or turned a blind eye to misconduct. It wasn't an easy decision. Many of these individuals had been with the company for years, but Jonathan knew that real change required bold action. To fill the void left by these departures, he promoted people who embodied integrity and collaboration. Maria, of course, was at the top of his list. Though she was initially surprised and even hesitant to accept a leadership position, Jonathan convinced her that her mentorship skills and passion for helping others were exactly what the company needed. She was appointed head of a newly formed employee development department, tasked with creating programs to support struggling workers, encourage innovation, and foster teamwork across departments. Maria's promotion sent a powerful message throughout the organization. Success at Hartwell Technologies wouldn't be measured solely by numbers or titles, but by the positive impact someone had on their colleagues and the company culture. Employees who had previously felt overlooked or undervalued suddenly saw a path forward, one where hard work and kindness were rewarded just as much as ambition. Rebuilding trust, Jonathan understood that restructuring the leadership team was only the first step. To truly rebuild trust within the company, he needed to address the disconnect between management and employees. Inspired by his time as Jack, he implemented several initiatives designed to bridge that gap. First, he introduced monthly town hall meetings where employees at all levels could voice concerns, share ideas, or ask questions directly to him. These sessions weren't scripted or polished, they were raw and honest, giving everyone a chance to speak freely. At first, attendance was low, with many employees skeptical about whether their voices would actually matter. But as they saw Jonathan listen attentively and take actionable steps based on their feedback, participation grew steadily. He also launched a peer recognition program called Hartwell Heroes, which allowed employees to nominate coworkers who went above and beyond in their roles, whether it was staying late to help a teammate meet a deadline or coming up with a creative solution to a tough problem. No act of kindness or dedication went unnoticed. Winners received public acknowledgement during company-wide meetings, along with small rewards like gift cards or extra vacation days. The program quickly became a favorite among employees, fostering a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. Transforming the workplace culture. Perhaps the most significant change Jonathan made was shifting the focus from profit-driven metrics to employee well-being and satisfaction. He realized that happy, engaged employees were more productive, innovative, and loyal. To achieve this, he invested in wellness programs, flexible work arrangements, and professional development opportunities. Departments that had previously operated in silos were encouraged to collaborate, breaking down barriers and encouraging cross-functional projects. Maria's employee development department played a crucial role in this transformation. Under her, leadership workshops on topics like effective communication, conflict resolution, and time management became regular fixtures in the company calendar. She also spearheaded a mentorship program pairing experienced employees with newcomers, ensuring that knowledge and expertise were shared widely. Over time, these efforts began to bear fruit. Teams worked better together, turnover rates dropped, and overall morale soared. Reflections from Jonathan for Jonathan, the entire experience was humbling. Going undercover as Jack had opened his eyes to both the flaws and strengths of his company. He'd seen firsthand how easily power could corrupt and how silence could enable wrongdoing. But he'd also witnessed the resilience and compassion of ordinary employees who cared deeply about their work and each other. In private moments, Jonathan often reflected on the lessons he'd learned. One of the most profound insights was that leadership wasn't about being untouchable or invincible. It was about serving others. As CEO, his job wasn't just to steer the company toward success. It was to create an environment where every employee felt valued, respected, and empowered to contribute their best. "I used to think my role was to make decisions," he told Emily one evening over dinner. "But now I realize it's to listen, to really hear what people are saying even when they're not speaking directly to me." Emily smiled knowingly. "You've come a long way since your days as Jack," she said. "And so has the company." Lasting legacy months later, Hartwell Technologies was virtually unrecognizable from the organization Jonathan had left behind when he donned his janitor uniform. Productivity and profits were higher than ever, but more importantly, the workplace buzzed with energy and enthusiasm. Employees laughed together in the break room, collaborated seamlessly on projects, and supported one another through challenges. The invisible walls that had once separated different levels of the company had crumbled, replaced by a shared sense of purpose and belonging. Jonathan's experiment as Jack had not only saved the company from potential disaster, but also reignited his passion for leadership. He continued to walk the halls of Hartwell Technologies, not as a distant figurehead but as an engaged participant in its daily life. He still wore tailored suits and presided over board meetings, but he never forgot the lessons he'd learned while mopping floors and emptying trash bins. Looking back, Jonathan knew that disguising himself as a janitor had been one of the best decisions he'd ever made. It had reminded him of the humanity behind the business, the people who kept the wheels turning, the hearts beating, and the dreams alive. And as he stood on the 50th floor of his skyscraper office, watching the city lights twinkle below, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for his employees, for Maria, and for the simple yet transformative experience of seeing the world through someone else's eyes.